Okay, so okay, good, good. Okay, so now we want this one, this one, this one, this one, this one. Done. Let's go. Okay, I see that there are attendees in here, which is awesome. Yay. We will get started at 7. And so if you've got any questions, get them uploaded into the queue right now. I have some dough that I mixed up that I'm going to stretch and fold as we go. So I've got lots of stuff I can chat with you about. But if you're attending and you're watching, make sure you upload your questions. I'm just going to pause everything now until about 7 o'clock and then get started. Yes. Okay, so we're here. We're good to go. We're all set up. I've got some dough that I just mixed. I am here, so if you've got any questions, then definitely ask them. Oh, let's say this. Nice. Awesome. Okay, so I'm Sarah. I'm from Sourdough for Beginners. We are here to answer questions tonight, so keep uploading them. Do text questions, but do video for sure. Say hi, show me your bread. So Deer Slayer says, I just started following you. Thank you for sharing your sourdough adventure with all of us. First time on this platform tonight. I can't wait to watch what you have in store for us. Yay! So when I go live on Facebook, I usually have something planned. It's almost always let's mix the beginner bread recipe or let's do a bagel mix or whatever it may be. But this platform actually allows people to come in and ask their questions directly to me, and then I can help them troubleshoot whatever they're working on or get it set up for them, right? So I don't really have that much planned. I do have some dough. Here it is. And it needs to be stretched and folded and eventually get into the bulk proofing containers. So as we go, I'll be working on that because we never neglect our sourdough. But what I'm really hoping is that you guys ask your questions and we talk about what they are. So each picture, what's aliquot pertaining to sourdough process? Ooh, that's a good question. Give me 1 second. I will explain it to you. Let me just go look at something. Bear with me. I just want to make sure that I don't say anything wrong. But what I do know is that this is a really great time to talk about the essential processes. So when we are teaching, we're focusing on beginners, total newbies who have like never in their lives done sourdough and they're just trying to figure out, how to make this work, right? So how it would take to do sourdough. So one of the things that we always say, oh, here we go. I'm not sure if you guys are hearing me okay there. I hope you were. My headphones just kicked in. Hang on 1 second. So what is aliquot? Sourdough. Let's just pull this up here. Let's see something. Okay. So what we're always saying to beginners at sourdough is this: keep it as simple as you can possibly keep it, right? And there are lots of crazy terms out there, not even crazy, there's just lots of various terms out there and lots of different ways to do things. So aliquot is basically about bulk fermentation. It's where you take a small piece of your dough and put it into a jar. So you've got your dough all mixed, right? And you leave your dough sitting in your bowl and you take a small piece and you put it into a jar and you basically note what the height is. And once it's doubled in the jar, then your dough is ready to go. Or maybe you're trying to go to 50% or 75% or whatever it might be, right? We have something called the bulk proofing success method where we take our entire dough and put it in clear, straight-sided containers like this, right? The aliquot method, it does essentially the same thing. It's just showing you how much your dough has risen as you go, right? You often want to try to have your jar be the same temperature as the bowl that your dough is in. So we're always talking about this. What are the essential processes? What does a sourdough beginner need to be able to understand the processes and the science enough to be able to get to making really good breads? And then from there, what are the advanced processes? How do they start adding them? So creating an autolyse is an advanced process. Creating a levain is an advanced process. Aliquot, same thing, advanced process. So to summarize, you mix your dough, you finish stretching and folding, and then it's time to bulk proof. During bulk proofing, what we're doing is
watching for the dough to rise. If we're going to cold proof our bread, then we want our dough to rise to approximately 75%. If we are going to cook our bread on the same day, then we want it to rise to 100%. Those percentages vary based on how much hydration you have, what kind of flour you've used, what environment you're in, but those are good guidelines to follow. The aliquot method actually takes a piece of your dough that you've made and puts it into a smaller container that's condensed, and the dough touches the edges and you can actually watch it grow. I hope that makes sense. So I will make sure that when this live is over, I actually go on to the Sourdough for Beginners Facebook page and post about what we talked about today. So let's just make notes as we go. So aliquot versus bulk proofing. So what are the essential processes? The essential processes are the absolute basics that you need to be able to get a decent sourdough loaf, right? And what does that look like? How do we help beginners get to a point where they're not wasting all kinds of materials, they're not getting super frustrated, they're not having a terrible time, right? And so we've reduced it down to the essential processes. The essential processes are mix your dough to a shaggy mix, wait 30 minutes, stretch and fold, repeat that 30 minutes and stretch and fold a total of 4 times. Transfer your dough into clear, straight-sided containers. The beginner bread recipe makes 2 loaves, and so I do 2 clear, straight-sided containers. You can actually take the beginner bread recipe and split it right in half, right down the middle, and that will help you you can split the recipe right down the middle and then you'll have a single loaf instead. Put your dough into clear straight-sided containers, mark the height of the dough, right? Putting your dough into a container that's tight where the dough touches the edges and only can go up is important, because if you mix yeast bread before, you know that when you have a yeast bread, it starts out like a ball and it grows like a ball. It sort of grows on all sides in a circular shape. Sourdough doesn't do that. Sourdough spreads. It fills whatever vessel it's in. So if you let sourdough rise in a big container like this, it's a lot harder to see how much it's grown, because the first thing it's going to do is sort of fall flat, and then it's going to start spreading out in this giant container. So it's not that your dough won't rise, and it's not that you have to do this bulk proofing success method. It's that you can see it better in here because the dough is touching the edges essentially on all sides, right? It's making it so that you can see what's happening. And you can say, okay, well, I would like my dough to go to 75% today. I would like it to go to 100%. So then you can start estimating what it's done. After your dough is bulk proofed, you then pre-shape it, let it rest for 30 minutes. So pre-shaping is where we take our dough, which has risen. It's very sticky, right? It's stuck to all the edges of the thing, the bulk proofing container. You know, it's done its airy, bubbly thing, but it's very sticky. We peel it out of the container, and then we take it and place and put it on the counter. We don't use any water, no flour, no nothing, just a good tool like a bench scraper, and pre-shape our dough. Start to force air into the dough, build tension within the dough, build a nice skin on top of that dough, right? Then we let it rest for a bit, we shape it, we score it, we bake it, or we shape it, and we cold proof it, and then the next morning we score it and we bake it. H picture. So I think this is Hildy. Says, I want to start out very small, no waste or discard. I want 60 grams for a recipe. How should I start with what amounts of flour and water? So if you don't have a starter yet and you're going to build your own starter, you only need a very small amount. You don't need to have a ton of waste. The reality is that once your starter activates, it's easy to grow it. You could grow it huge from your very tiny amount. I just did a live on Facebook. It only takes a little tiny bit of starter to create more starter. So if your first recipe is going to call for 60 grams of starter, then you could start with like 25 grams of water and 25 grams of flour. Mix those together. Tomorrow, right, day 2, discard back to 25 grams and then feed 25 grams each of flour and water, and discard back to 25 grams every day and refeed 25 grams each of flour and water. Now, Hildy, has been a follower for a bit, and she's really does not want to have any sour flavor in her bread whatsoever. She wants a nice, light, airy French style loaf, right? So what Hildy could do is make her starter more flour heavy. So she could do something like 30 grams of flour and 20 grams of water, right? We're still sort of discarding back to 20 or 25 grams every day, but we only need the small amount, and we need to feed our starter, discard every day. Unfortunately, for that first 8 to 10 days with the starter, we do have to throw our discard away, or what we take out, right? The only reason we're taking out of the starter is to make room to continue feeding it, because one of two things happens. Either you feed it equal parts every day and it gets ginormous, right? Or you don't discard and you keep feeding it every day, and every day it's bigger and the feeding is the same size. So you slowly starve your starter. So you discard every day, you refeed until it doubles. Once it doubles consistently every feed, so once you see it do that 2 or 3 times, you know it's now doubling consistent. You can say, okay, this is an active starter. Once it's an active starter, then you can start feeding it according to how you're baked. So Hildy says, I only want 60 grams for a recipe. It's always good to have about a base that's between 25 and 75 or 100 grams, depending on how much you bake, right? Because you want to be able to take out of your starter to mix into your bread. And so you want to make sure that you always leave that behind. So Hildy, now you say on your first day, when tomorrow's your bake day, or later today is your bake day, discard back to 25 grams, feed 30 grams each flour and water. That gives you the 25 grams that's in your jar plus the 60 grams that you need for your recipe, right? Once it doubles or peaks, you can put it into your bread recipe. It leaves you with 25 grams behind, which always serves as your base. Hildy, in your situation, because you want a less sour starter, you could do something like 40 grams of flour and 20 grams of water, or 35 grams of flour and 25 grams of water. I hope that makes sense. So Dear Slayer says, I just started adding the levain and auto lease to my baking last week. Do you feel this is a good thing to add to get the most out of the sourdough process? That's a great question. We say that beginners should only focus on the essential processes, while understanding that the other processes that are out there that we say are non-essential or advanced, optional or advanced, exist, and that they all have a good reason, right? So let's just do one at a time. In regards to a levain, people create levains from their starters because they want a very specific base. So just in the last question, I've had discussions with Hildy before, and she's very focused on having a very non-sour loaf. The way to make your loaf less sour is to have a starter that's not super hungry. It's fermented and it's active, but it's not going to that alcohol phase. So the only reason that we would create a levain is because we want to control how the starter is acting. So for example, if we're feeding our starter on a 1:1:1 ratio every day, which is say 50 grams of starter, 50 grams of flour, 50 grams of water, right? But we want a very French style, low sour taste loaf, then we might scoop 50, say for example, we might scoop 10 grams out of that starter and do a 1:5:5 feed, right? Which is 10 grams of starter, 50 grams of flour, 50 grams of water. This is going to be a slow rising, slow fermenting starter that is going to create a much lighter taste in our bread. So the answer is, with a levain, the only reason you would do a levain is if you want to alter the state of your starter for your recipe without altering your actual starter. In most cases, if you're not an advanced baker, you can just feed your starter directly in the jar, wait for it to double, and measure directly into your recipe. I'm a sourdough expert. I never make a levain. I always just mix in my jar. Autolyse is entirely different. So what an autolyse is where we take our flour and our water and we mix for our recipe. So we've got our bread recipe. It's got starter, salt, flour, and water. We take our flour and our water and we mix them together well before we start mixing our actual dough, right? Some people call for a 30-minute auto lease. Some people call for a 24-hour auto lease. What is technically happening in an auto lease is that the water is starting to break down and ferment the flour exactly the same way as when we made our starter from scratch, right? An auto lease can create a further breakdown of the gluten structure in our bread. Do beginners need it? I don't think they do at all. Is it something that can enhance your bread? If you have mastered the essential processes, if you can make perfect bread every time without using an autolyse or a levain, then these are great things to experiment. And these are the ways that you're going to start adjusting. Okay, well, how do I adjust the flavor of my bread? How do I adjust how light my bread or how heavy my bread might be? So an autolyse is absolutely a good thing. It's just whether or not it's too advanced. So, Dear Slayer, my answer to you is if you've mastered those essential techniques and you're getting perfect bread every time, absolutely do those things. If you're not getting perfect bread every time, then I would rewind back and I would go just to the essential processes. And I would especially focus on mastering bulk proofing, which is getting that bread to the point where it's not underproofed, it's not overproofed. Every time you cook a loaf, it rises perfectly. It's got a nice crumb inside. It's good to go. Oh, let's see. Got a video question here. So watch, guys. This is really neat. I would love it if you guys did this. Show me your dough, etc.
Hey, just saying hi from Ontario, Canada, and letting everybody know in the app that you can upload video questions at any time during the broadcast using starcam.com/app, or just go in your app store and download the app, and that way we can see what you're doing at the time, or you can interact at a different way. Talk to you soon.
That was cool. I'm going to play that again. Just give me 1 sec here. Having some issues with my headphones.
Hey, just saying hi from Ontario, Canada, and letting everybody know in the app that you can upload video questions at any time during the broadcast using starcam.com/app, or just go in your app store and download the app, and that way we can see what you're doing at the time, or you can interact at a different way. Talk to you soon.
Cool. There we go. Okay, cool. So some of you might actually be watching this on YouTube. Let's see here. And I actually have the ability to see our YouTube questions. Sorry. So Heidi said, just a question in advance. After your first 4 to 6 hour doubling rise in your starter, how many days would you continue a normal feeding? I can't get any big jars to keep stuff in till Friday. So Heidi just asked this on YouTube. So I'm just trying to figure that after your first 4 to 6 hour doubling rise in your starter. Okay, so feeding your starter. What that comes down to is you have basically, there's a million ways to feed your starter, but there's 3 sort of standard ways. If you're baking every day, then discard and feed your starter every day and keep it on the counter. Don't put it in the fridge, right? When we say discard, usually what you're doing is dumping straight into your bread, right? Once your starter is established and it doubles consistently every feed, you actually can go for the rest of your life without ever discarding, unless you like making discard recipes, right? So that is one way. Another way, Heidi, is that you can stick your starter in the fridge and leave it until you're ready to bake. About 4 to 12 hours before you're ready to bake, you can take your starter out of the fridge, discard it down to 50 or 60 grams, whatever you need, feed it, leave it sitting on the counter, and wait for it to double. And then sort of the last way to manage your starter is if you bake every 2 to 3 days, then you can mix your dough and refeed your starter right away after you mix your dough, wait for it to double, and then stick it in the fridge. And then usually within 2 or 3 days, you can use it straight out of the fridge. So I just mixed the dough about half an hour ago. I refed my starter right away. I'm just going to wait for it to double, and then I'm going to stick it in the fridge. And I'll show you my one that's in the fridge. So this one, got fed at my last bake, and I waited for it to double. It's been in the fridge for about a day and a half now, and it hasn't fallen yet. The fridge significantly slows down the fermentation process, and so therefore when I'm ready to bake, I can pull it straight out of the fridge. I don't let it come to room temperature or anything. I just dump it straight into my bread. So let's see here. Okay, cool. So I was just having some issues with my earbuds here. I'm just going to see if I can get them to work again. Bear with me for a second. Here we go. There's a solid chance that oh yeah, they're not dead. These earbuds are amazing. They actually like tune everything out, and also when I'm on these lives, if I need to like walk away for a second to get something or grab something, then I absolutely can. Okay, so let's talk about this dough. I just mixed this dough a little while ago, and I have done my first stretch and fold, and I need to stretch and fold it in about 5 minutes or so. Chris says, what makes the starter stay stable and get stronger as it gets older month by month? That's a great question. So starters are fermented. It's just like beer or kombucha or even pickles, right? All that's happening is that two things are mixing together and creating something new. It's also like vodka from potatoes or I forget what whiskey's made from, but whatever it is that these alcohols are made from, all it is that they take some sort of grain or vegetable or legume or whatever it is, and they add water to it and they let them start mixing, right? So with your starter, the only way to keep a starter stable is to feed it on a consistent schedule, right? If I were to take this starter right now and never feed it again and leave it sitting on the counter, and as long as it didn't mold, which is unlikely in my case because I keep a tightly sealed lid, right? If I just left it for a while, eventually it would completely ferment all the way to the end of the fermentation process. And the end of the fermentation process is alcohol, right? That's why sometimes it smells very sour. People say it smells like acetone, or it smells like this, or it smells like that, right? All we're doing is catching our starter somewhere in the fermentation process. With sourdough starter, what we want is to catch it at the point where the fermentation is creating a wild yeast, right? I mean, we know that there's yeast that comes from the same thing that makes beer, everything else. So the only way to keep a starter stable is to feed it, and we can control where we're catching it in that fermentation process based on how much we feed, how often we feed, and when we catch it in that feeding process. What makes it get stronger month by month? It's just like anything else, right? This is Mama. She's an established starter. She's used frequently. She's fed and used and fed and used. The more you feed a starter, the more established those bacteria that are in their gut. Now, am I able to explain the science of what makes it get stronger as it gets older? I actually can't. I would have to do some Googling to fully explain that to you. But what I suspect is that as it, sort of peaks and falls and peaks and falls and peaks and falls, it's just like anything else, right? It's like a plant that's growing and getting stronger as we go. I hope that makes sense. Let's see.
Dear Slayer here. Just wanted to touch base with you. Again, I appreciate everything you're doing. And I've never baked before. Just started about a year and a half ago, and only 2 weeks ago started adding sourdough to my arsenal. And right at the moment, I'm got my auto lease on 2 batches. And here's Sarah. She's my main starter, doubling well. I can't stop
Yay!
baking. I'm so addicted to sourdough. Everyone loves my bread. I just can't get enough. So thank you again. I'll
Yay!
try and think of some more questions to ask as we're going here, but thanks again.
That's so awesome. I love hearing that. I can't believe your starter's named Sarah. I don't know if that has anything to do with me, but I am having some issues with my earbuds. I'm not hearing my question super well, so I'm just going to take these out. I hope you guys can still hear me really well. So, yay, thank you so much for that. I love seeing your auto lease. Your starter looks super strong. It looks great. It's doubling. Everything's going really good. So, you're 2 weeks in, you're good to go. With the essential processes, what I've never said, and I never will say, that any of the advanced or optional processes that are there are not good. I've never said that, and I never will. They're all fantastic. The biggest thing is trying to figure out how to get them in order and how to make them work. So definitely come let me know how that auto lease ends up working for you. I'm curious to hear. Hang on 1 second. Let's see what happens here. We got that. Here we go. Okay. Chris says, can you feed the starter anywhere from weekly to monthly? My best starter was in the fridge for a month and a half before I fed it. I'm a little confused. Yes. Okay. So you were talking before, Chris, about stability and strength, right? And everything in sourdough is a guideline, right? We're operating in our own environment. Your house has this much stuff in the air and this temperature, and you're using this much water and this much flour and this brand of flour and this type of everything, right? The thing about sourdough is that we're always estimating. What we recommend is that if you want to keep a starter super stable, feed it regularly. So people who store their starter in the fridge, we say if you just want to go on the safe side, feed it once every 7 days or 4 to 12 hours before you bake, whichever comes first, right? That being said, we know there's people like you who've left a starter in the fridge. I've got people who post in the group about having had a starter in the fridge since the COVID craze of starter back in, or of sourdough way back in 2020. And now here we are years later. And as long as it doesn't mold, it's still a fermented product, right? It's the same way that we can leave pickles or pickled eggs in the fridge for weeks and months and everything else, right? I make pickled eggs for my husband all the time, and the longer they sit, the more he likes them. So don't be confused. This is all normal. And what we encourage you to do as a beginner or as someone who's learning the science of sourdough is do these experiments and find what works best for you. All right, let's see.
Starters get stronger over time because of the wild yeast, and I don't know how to pronounce it, but it's like lactobacillus bacteria. Anyways, those get stronger over time. So those living organisms in your starter grow and become stronger and older over time.
Awesome. Okay, so if you guys haven't ever seen him before, that's Rick. He's an admin in both the Sourdough for Beginners Facebook group, which is at like 730,000 members now. It's a little crazy, but then again, it's kind of not, because everybody loves sourdough. So he is like a sourdough scientist. So Deer Slayer just came on. I find that the men, and I shouldn't generalize, I shouldn't speculate, but the men in the group tend to like really want to know about the science stuff, right? So Deer Slayer just put his video up, and he's already trying autolyse and Levain and everything else, right? And then there's Tom Kukuza from the Sourdough Journey. He's like the sourdough scientist. Like his stuff is so fantastic, and I have so much respect for him. But anyways, Rick, who just did this, is an admin in the group, and he's always helping me. I know like the essential processes. Let me help you as a beginner get to decent loaves. And then from there, I always say people graduate to Tom from me, right? So thanks for that, Rick. He always helps me with this stuff. Let's see here. Okay. We can hear you great. I hope you still can. My earbuds kept like going in and out, and then also like my little button that flips between earbuds and speaker were kind of being weird. So I don't know why my earbuds won't hold on to the stream, but they were having issues. So I finally just took them out.
I believe
Let's
it's
see what it says.
lactobacilli bacteria and yeast that wild yeast that are growing live in your starter.
Cool. Okay, so that's what's making it stronger over time. So Chris was asking, what makes it stable? What makes it really strong? So, do I know all that science stuff? I've certainly read it. Do I know basically what it's doing? Yeah, I kind of do, right? I am a fly by the seat of my pants person. So I do appreciate when the scientists in the group come in and say these things to me. I like knowing it.
Apparently, you can leave starters in the fridge for a month and a half at a time. But the thing is, you want to check for activity when you bring it back. You want to make sure that it's back and active and doubling consistently again.
Yeah. So Chris, so what Chris said, and it's a really interesting thing, right? Chris said, I have a couple of starters, and I have one that I fed every week, and then I had one that I left in the fridge for like a month and a half, and then I fed it, and it was actually stronger than the other one. The one in the fridge had all this time to ferment, right? It had all this time to get to those words that Rick just said about yeast and bacterias, right? There is a case for letting a starter sit to really ferment long through the process to make it stronger. The only thing I always say is that we're really focused on beginners, right? And all of this stuff is valid. It's absolutely valid and it's super fantastic, but it might be a little bit more advanced than beginners need. Or in fact, sometimes complicated stuff like this can take a beginner way down a path that ends up causing them to struggle a little bit. And so I don't necessarily focus on it all that much. Okay, so let's do this dough. This dough is mixed. It's been stretched and folded once already. Okay, so I'm just going to turn my camera here, and I'm going to tell you guys what happens during stretching and folding. So we mixed our dough. It got it to a shaggy mix. We waited 30 minutes. We did a stretch and fold. Now we've waited 30 more minutes. We're going to do our second stretch and fold. I'm going to do 4 total. What we're doing with stretching and folding is building strength. It's essentially the same as kneading a yeast spread, right? So I'm just going to get my hand wet. If you ever watched me mix the dough before, during that first mixing stage, I always hold my hand up and it looks like a snow mitten, like there's just dough across my fingers. On my second stretch and fold, if you watch on this first pull up, it'll stretch quite a bit, but it's not tearing that. It's not really tearing, right? So I'm going to flip it on top. It's also barely sticking to my hand, right? We know that we have built enough strength in our sourdough when it starts to hold on to itself more than it starts to hold on to anything else. In other words, when we build elasticity into our dough, we have stretched and folded enough. With beginners, what we say is, don't worry, over time you'll start to understand how a good strength in your dough feels, right? But for now, just to be safe, do 4 sets of 30-minute rest and then a stretch and fold, right? So this was my second stretch and fold. And as you can see, the dough is barely sticking to my hands at all. But also, watch this. During my first stretch and fold, I could actually take the dough and I could pull it way up here and it would eventually rip. And I'd have a pile of dough in my hand and a pile of dough down here. Watch this. If I grab this dough and pick it up, look. That's called elasticity. It will eventually rip, watch. But it's holding on to itself more than it's holding on to anything else. So 2 more sets of stretch and folds from now, I'll be confident that I've built enough strength. There is one little trick that we can use. It's called the window pane effect. Again, a little bit more advanced than most beginners need. But what we're doing with the window pane effect is we're actually taking the dough and we're trying to stretch it like this. And if it goes translucent, right, if it stays together in one piece without ripping and goes translucent, then it's strong enough. But as you can see, this is still ripping. So we haven't built enough strength yet. So we want to come back and do at least 1 more set of stretch and folds, maybe 2, right? And with beginners, what we say is just do it 4 times. 4 times is almost always enough. right? And even on your very first mix of sourdough, you'll feel that strength begin to happen. So let's see what we've got here, Hildy.
Hey, Sarah, just have a question. If you buy and purchase a package of sourdough starter, for example, like from King Arthur flour, and then they send that, you mix it up with water, whatever, do you still have to work with that for 2 weeks, the discard and add before you can use that?
No, you don't. That's a great question, Hildy. Hang on 1 second. I'll show you. So actually, I can show you. No, I don't have any of the other stuff ready. So this is dehydrated starter. It's 15 grams. So I've taken Mama, my starter that I use in all of my recipes. I've dehydrated it and then I've just put it into a blender and made it small. There's 15 grams here. If the starter that you purchase, so if you purchase the King Arthur one, people can buy mine off of Etsy. If you purchase that starter, it is an established starter. So it should only take 3 to 4 days to activate. What we recommend is that you just follow the instructions that come with your starter at first, just to get it activated. As soon as it starts doubling consistently, usually around day 3 or day 4 of having your dehydrated starter, then you can start adjusting the feeding however you want. So we've talked about how we can feed our starter dough, whether it's every day or every 7 days or once a month, and whether it's heavy flour and low water or 1 to 1 to 1 or 1 to 5 to 5, right? Just you have to get it activated. For activating, basically all you're doing is adding water and discarding and refeeding until it doubles. It usually a dehydrated starter takes 3 days of feeding at minimum and sometimes up to 5. Okay, cool. All right, so we're doing good here. We've got questions coming in. A little bit of a break here. I'm just going to check and see if there's anything on YouTube. Good. Frank says, looks good. Okay, good. I'm glad, Frank. That's awesome. Frank, I've been having issues with my headphones. I've got these really nice Bose headphones. They're quite good. They actually have immersion. They tune everything out. They act as a microphone. I use them on lives all the time, but for some reason I've been having trouble getting them to hold on to the stream. And so I finally just given up on them and I'm just going with my regular voice. So I hope everything sounds okay. And I don't really know why those won't hold on. But cool. This is awesome. So we won't stay on too much longer unless anybody else has any questions. Looks like we got through them. I'm really glad. So Chris and Hildy and Rick and Deer Slayer, whose starter's name is Sarah. That's really cool. If there's any more questions, get them in now and we'll do it. Otherwise, I'll tell you what I'm going to do with this for the rest of tonight. I am not going to stay up for this to bulk proof tonight. I'm simply just not going to do it. So at 8 o'clock, I'm going to stretch and fold this again. And then at 8:30, I'll do my final stretch and fold. That will be my 4th stretch and fold. At that point, I'm going to split this dough into 2 and get it into my bulk proofing containers. I'm going to mark their height. And then I'm going to use my fridge to manage my timing. So with my fridge, it will slow down the fermentation of my dough. So I always say with bulk proofing, we really want it to happen when we can keep our eye on it. And that in most cases, it takes somewhere between 4 and 8 hours. Season's changing here. I've been struggling with my dough since the humidity started to rise here in Ontario. I really want to watch this one. So I will put this dough in the fridge tonight. And then tomorrow when I get up, I'll pull it out of the fridge and let it continue to bulk proof on the counter. I'll know where it started because I'll have put it in my bulk proofing containers and marked that height. And then I'll just carry on for the rest of the time. Greg says it sounds great. Okay, awesome. Good. Okay. All right. So I'm going to so tomorrow I'll pull this out of the fridge. I'll wait for it to finish bulk proofing. I'm going to let it go all the way to 100% because I'm going to bake the same day. Then I'm going to pre-shape my dough. I'm going to let it rest for 30 minutes. I'm going to shape my dough. I'm going to score it and I'm going to bake it right away. All right. One last question and then I think we'll wrap up for the night.
Deerslayer is the very best baking name I've ever heard in my whole life. And also, I want to know if he makes pepperonis in the fall, because I love deer pepperonis and I also love deer salami.
Maybe we'll wait for a second to see if Deerslayer answers that. We have a friend named Ron who hunts like a lot. The food he makes is so good. It's so good, and it's not stuff that I can make. Let's just check here. Okay, we're looking good here. So we'll come back here like this, and we will make this go away. And there we go. Okay, I'm just going to play a quick media file. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to play just a quick beginning of the beginner bread recipe. And then I'm going to come back and check. And if there's any more questions, we will answer them. And if there's not, then we will wrap up for the night. Let's see here. Nope, I don't want that. This.
Okay, let's get started. So first things first, I start by measuring 120 grams of active starter into my bowl. Next, I tare my scale to 0 and I add 680 grams of water. I'm using regular tap water. I use the whisk to mix my water and my starter, and I stir until my starter is fully dissolved. Next, I tare my scale back to 0 and I add 850 grams of all-purpose or regular bread flour. Next, I add 150 grams of a sturdier flour, either whole wheat, rye, spelt, oat. I get to a total of 1,000 grams of flour. Next, I add 20 grams of salt. I just pour it in. I tared my scale back to 0 again and watch for 20 grams. Now I use a spoon to blend my flour and salt on top of my liquid. And once it's blended, I begin stirring the dough with my spoon. I keep stirring.
Okay, all right. So I'm going to wrap up, but I thought of one more thing that people ask me all the time. What point do we separate our dough into 2 loaves? So the beginner bread recipe makes 2 loaves. It works out to 2 1,000-gram total loaves approximately, somewhere between 980 and 1,010. If you're using the beginner bread recipe, they weigh a little less because you have less starter and less water. The level 2 hydration has a little bit more. Oh, Deerslayer answered Rick. I think I'll play that in just a sec. But when is the best time to separate our double mix of dough into 2? If you don't want to mix in 2 bowls, that's not efficient, right? But if you try to separate your dough early, like right after you've mixed, it's very sticky and it'll stick to everything, right? So let's mix in 1 bowl to make things easier. Let's not separate before the stretch and folds are done. The ideal time to separate your dough into 2 loaves and put them into your bulk proofing containers is right after stretching and folding is done. If you bulk proof in a larger container, both of them, the only issue is that at that point, once your dough is risen, it's much stickier, right? This is why we need to pre-shape. And so you would have to pre-shape this huge ball, right? And then try to cut it and weigh it to make sure that the 2 loaves are the same size. And the reality is that when we're pre-shaping, we're doing 2 things. We're taking the stickiness away, but we're also trapping air inside and building tension in the dough, right? So if we start cutting it and messing with it to try and weigh it, that's not an ideal time either. So what we do is we mix our dough, we stretch and fold it 4 times, and then we separate it into 2 loaves and get it into the bulk proofing container.
I'm 64. I just retired. I'm a big hunter. I harvested all my animals and processed every one of them. I don't make pepperoni, but I just got into canning about 2 months ago, and I canned my entire buck this year. So loving life, loving retirement. Yeah. I don't have any Bitcoins to buy right now, so I'm definitely going to be back the next time you're on, and I'll have some questions more to follow, and we'll go from there. And again, just ecstatic on all this. I really, really enjoy it. And I thought Sarah was appropriate after following you so much. So thank you again. Men can do it. Anybody can do it regardless. I mean, don't be
Sometimes
discouraged. It's not that hard. Thank you.
that's so good. You're welcome. You're welcome. That's so great. Honestly, I don't like saying it, but sometimes the men are better. The guys seem to get it faster than the women. Sometimes I hate saying that because I'm the sourdough girl. But thanks for being here, Deer Slayer. I usually like recognize people's names, like Hildy H. Pitcher. Like I recognize the last name. So make sure you come onto whatever format you found me in, whether it was YouTube or Facebook, and say, hey, Sarah, I'm Deer Slayer, so that I know who you are, because we do get people who we recognize who have been in the group for a really long time and who talk to us. And I really like the connection. And, it's really nice to see you guys uploading videos and talking to me, because I feel like I'm just talking to a screen all the time. So that's really awesome. Really great. Okay, let's see. I think we can wrap up. I appreciate you guys all being here. I'm here every Monday night at 7 p.m. I'm committed. I'm going to do it as long as people come on and ask questions and it seems valuable to people, then I'm going to come. So thank you so much for being here. Oh, Rick says, fantastic. That's so great. And I appreciate you all so much. And we'll see you all on the at Sourdough for Beginners YouTube or Facebook or wherever you found me. Let's learn together. We'll get this covered. Wrapping up now. See you later.
Resting, I refeed my starter. I use a 60-gram 1:1:1 ratio. There's 60 grams of starter already in there, and I add 60 grams each of flour and water. I stir, and I store it on my counter close to my stove where it can stay nice and warm. I repeated the whole process and mixed up a second batch. The first batch was with whole wheat flour, and the second batch is with spelt flour. Now it's time to do our first set of stretch and folds. Stretching and folding builds strength into your bread. As you can see, during the first stretch and fold, the dough still rips. It's not quite together. As we continue to stretch and fold 2 to 3 more times, it'll get stronger, and I'll show you soon how to tell when you've built enough strength. It's time for our second stretch and fold. You can see just by looking at the dough that it's starting to come together more, and when I stretch it and fold it, it's holding together. It's starting to build strength. This is my third set of stretch and folds. The dough is getting stronger, holding together really well, and this is going to be my last set of stretch and folds before I begin separating my dough into their containers for bulk proofing. There will be a little bit of stretch and folding then, but we're really getting there with strength.